If you would pray with me. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. In Jesus' name, amen. Today we hear God's thoughts and feelings and plans coming to us through the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah was often called the weeping prophet because more than any other prophet that we know through the Old Testament, we're given a glimpse into his personal struggles, his suffering, his grief. And Jeremiah was called to this ministry about 800 years after Moses led the Israelites out of their enslavement in Egypt. Over those 800 years, divisiveness has developed among the people of Israel, and it has become so deep that they have divided into two nations. There was the nation of Israel to the north and the nation of Judah to the south. The northern nation had been destroyed by invaders and had ceased to even exist 100 years before Jeremiah's call. Jeremiah weeps over that brokenness among the people of Israel, that brokenness and that loss. The people of Israel who remained, the people of God who remained in Judah, have broken their covenant relationship with God at every turn. Jeremiah weeps over the arrogant, self-serving leaders of his nation that have undone anything that was good or godly in the previous administrations. He weeps over the way in which some people have made themselves rich at the expense of others. He weeps over how the people fill their day of worship with work, forgetting to honor God and to honor the Sabbath. He weeps over the way in which people have combined the practices of other religions with their worship of Yahweh, the true God of creation, the God who had lovingly invited them into this special, committed relationship. And he weeps over their broken promises to God. They have been unfaithful and distracted and disrespectful. The relationship was supposed to be like a loving, faithful marriage, but God's people were sleeping around with other gods. And Jeremiah weeps because God has shared with him the dire consequences that this will have for the people. He weeps over how he himself has been mistreated and mocked and attacked. Jeremiah's life work of writings is rejected and burned. He is ostracized. He is imprisoned. He receives death threats, all for speaking the truth to the people. Jeremiah is crying his eyes out. In Jeremiah 8:21, it says, "Since my people are crushed, I am crushed. I mourn and horror grips me. Is there no physician, no healing for the wound of my people?" He goes on, "Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. They are all adulterers, a crowd of unfaithful people. They go from one sin to another. They do not acknowledge me, declares the Lord." And suddenly we realize that it's not just Jeremiah weeping, but that these are God's words. And this is God weeping. Weeping over a broken covenant relationship. Weeping over a broken heart. God weeps over the natural consequences that are going to come to the people from their choices. They will be dragged into a terrible war which they will not win. Their cities will be destroyed, their land lost, homes lost, innocent lives lost, their place of worship lost. Many people will be dragged away as refugees into Babylon, and others will be taken along with Jeremiah as prisoners of war to Egypt. Jeremiah is a servant of God whose suffering reflects God's suffering over the sins of his people. And the relationship that had started so joyously and so hopefully had failed. Yet Jeremiah is given a glimpse of new hope, of a new relationship that God will establish with the people. The people's regret over these dire consequences of their unfaithfulness is not going to be enough to turn the situation around, because they had recognized their waywardness and they had repented many times over and over. Something else needed to change, something within the people themselves. King David recognized this need, and he wept over his own failure to be faithful, and he prayed, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new spirit within me." Jeremiah promises the people the time is coming when God will answer that prayer. My mind flashes forward to another servant of God who is weeping as he enters the city of Jerusalem to cheers and to shouts of joy. The people welcome him as the one who is coming in the name of the Lord, in the tradition and the line of King David. They bless him. "Blessed are you," they say, and they assure him of their loyalty by waving palms and laying their cloaks, a symbol of their very lives, on the ground before him. He has come to renew that relationship of covenant commitment between God and God's people. But the leaders and the teachers of the faith community, they interrupt that parade to tell Jesus off. And Luke tells us that as Jesus rides on from that encounter, the road crests over a hill with a view of the city of Jerusalem spread before him, and Jesus begins to weep. God is weeping again over the broken relationship with his people, even as God moves to inaugurate that promised new relationship, that new covenant. The fickleness of humanity is so apparent to Jesus, even more than the people around him, for he knows that the crowd that is shouting Hosanna in a few days will be shouting Crucify. He knows that his close friends who had committed to following him will soon betray him, deny him, or desert him. We too are weak and fickle. As we approach the end of this season of Lent, it's likely that we are more aware of this than ever, aware of our inability to follow God's way and remain faithful to a committed relationship with God in our own power. If we've been trying to use Lent as a genuine time to grow in obedience, we may have realized our weakness on days when we failed to keep the fast that we wanted to, when we cheated on whatever it was that we were going to avoid during Lent, or maybe when we neglected a day or two in the spiritual practice that we had decided we would do. Maybe you've tried to shake off a bad habit and gotten tired of that effort of improving yourself. Maybe you're weary of the inner turmoil or weary of the intermittent relationship with God. Or maybe you've allowed Lent to slip by without even a thought to spiritual growth, unwilling to even make the effort. If that's the case, then we are ready. to hear Jeremiah's good news. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. This new promise is one that unites the people that had been divided. It even restores a people that have been defeated. The number of ways in which humanity has found to create divisions is beyond counting. Political divisions, racial divisions, cultural divisions, age divisions, gender divisions. We have split Protestants and Catholics. We have split between the Baptists and the Lutherans and the non-denominationals. We have splits within splits. So a promise to unite is a promise that we need. Thankfully, this new covenant commitment will not be like the previous commitments that God's people were unable to keep. For this commitment will not be written on stones or something outside of themselves that they can just walk away from. It would be written now within them, on their hearts and their minds. God promises that the new promise, the new covenant, will change them from the inside out with the power to keep their promises and to uphold their end of the relationship. For the intention of that faithful, committed relationship is the one thing that does not change. God says it again, exactly the way God said it to Abraham and to Moses and to all the generations before that. God says again, I will be their God and they will be my people. So what is new? Why is this new covenant going to work? In verse 34 of that passage we read from Jeremiah, he gives two reasons. Because, he writes, and then he writes for, which also means because. The new relationship commitment will be different because they will all know me. They will not know about me, God says. They will know me. They will not know me through Moses or through some king or priest or pastor. They will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. The word to know that's used here is the same Hebrew word that is used to discreetly describe a husband and wife coming together to know one another in an intimate way. And it's a fitting word when God has just described his relationship with the people as a husband. No longer will this be a long-distance relationship. No longer will there be a mediating party that comes in between. This new relationship will be personal and intimate and direct. No one will be excluded from the opportunity to enter into this relationship. No one would be too unimportant or too forgotten. Secondly, no one will be too wayward or wicked or too weak. Because, God says to Jeremiah, because I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. The bottom line on this new covenant relationship was that God would forgive and forget. As Jesus reclined and shared the last meal with his closest friends, he picked up the cup of wine that was on the table, and he said a prayer of thanks for it. Thanks for the wine, we assume, but I believe that included a prayer of thanks for this new plan, for the new covenant that was about to be put into effect. Because Jesus then passes the cup around. He directs the disciples to pass it around, and he says, drink from it, all of you. Remember, he's including Judas, the betrayer, in this. Drink from it, all of you. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. This coming week, we have an opportunity to remember the events of that night as we gather together on Thursday evening. We have an opportunity on Friday to hear again the steps that Jesus took toward his death on the cross, where his blood would indeed be spilled as he was whipped, as a crown of thorns is shoved down on his head, as his hands and feet are nailed to wooden beams and he is lifted up. We will remember how Jesus closed the deal on this new covenant between God and humanity 2,000 years ago. So if that happened 2,000 years ago, why do we still need to teach one another about God? Why do we still need to invite our neighbors to know God? Why do we still falter and fail? At the beginning of this month, at the Kenyatta National Hospital in the city of Nairobi, a man was taken into an operating room for surgery. The doctors opened his skull and performed brain surgery with the intention of removing a clot from his brain. And several hours into this operation, the medical team realized they had the wrong patient on the table. The man on the operating table had a problem with his brain too, but he had chosen another treatment. He was not the one who had given consent for that surgery. The outcome, you'll be glad to know, is that both men are doing well, both the one who had planned on having that surgery and the one who was supposed to have been on the table and got his surgery just a little bit later than he had planned. God's new covenant requires a kind of surgical procedure. Our minds are opened for God's instructions to be put inside. Our hearts are open for God to write his words on our hearts. But unlike human doctors and nurses, God doesn't make mistakes or disregard a person's choice. God never does open heart surgery or brain surgery on someone without their consent. God must be given permission to enter into a person's life. God must be invited to activate this special relationship with us. We have to admit that we need this relationship with God, that we can't be faithful without help, that God needs to do for me what I am unable to do for myself. Each one of us needs to cry out, Hosanna, help us now, save us now. We're going to close with a song, This is Amazing Grace. And it truly is amazing grace that God would die for us, not because we have been so loyal and so faithful to God, but because we have failed to be faithful, because we have strayed and wandered away. This is amazing grace, and this is unfailing love. The choir and praise team would come up to lead us. And while they're coming up, I just want to invite anyone here who has never invited God to come into their hearts and minds, or anyone who feels that they may have pushed God away for a time and wants to invite God to return to your hearts and to your minds, that you would use the time of this song to pray to God and to do so while we sing this closing song. And then I invite you to come and speak with me afterwards so I can rejoice with you and say, Hosanna. This is amazing grace.